Monsters at Work is the latest series to hit Disney+. A sequel to Pixar's Monsters, Inc., it returns Billy Crystal and John Goodman to the roles of Mike and Sulley, and stars Ben Feldman, Mindy Kaling, Bonnie Hunt, and Henry Winkler. Before we get into this, don't forget to hit that like button down below. It does wonders in getting my content out there. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to keep up to date with all my content. Taking place one day after the original Monsters, Inc., Monsters at Work follows Tylor Tuskmon, an eager young monster who graduated top of his class at Monsters University and always dreamed of becoming a scarer until he lands a job at Monsters Incorporated and discovers that scaring is out and laughter is in. After Tylor is temporarily reassigned to the Monsters, Inc. facilities team, or MIFT, he must work alongside a misfit bunch of mechanics while setting his sights on becoming a jokester. This is one of the first batch of programs that was kind of announced or rumored to be dropping on the streaming service before it had even premiered. This is one of that first batch of programs that kind of got everyone, a little bit hyped for Disney Plus and showed everyone this is the kind of stuff that Disney are going to be doing when Disney Plus does launch. What is it, this series? It is, of course, as I said at the top of this, a sequel to the original Monsters, Inc. film, which actually celebrates its 20th anniversary this year. Can you believe it? All of my childhood things are turning 20 or 30, and I'm starting to feel really old. Now, I do want to preface from the beginning here that I've only seen the first 2 episodes. Again, usually when I do these early reviews for Disney Plus series, Disney will only provide like the first 2 or 3 episodes. In this case, I've only had the first 2 episodes of Monsters at Work, so that's kind of, where all my again, don't take this review as like a total review over the entire series. I kind of just want to get my thoughts out there about how I feel about how this show kind of gets going after these first 2 episodes. One of the major questions that people have been asking, I had this question myself going into this series, and I will address this from the top here, is how much screen time do Mike and Sulley get? I'm happy to say that Mike and Sulley actually do get quite a decent bit of screen time. I think a little bit more than I did expect. So now Mike and Sulley have been put in charge of the entire operations. Of course, Water News was carted out at the end of Monsters, Inc. for all these criminal activities. Mike and Sulley have now been put in the 2 head roles at Monsters, Inc. and they're kind of calling the shots of what's going on in this series. The first episode, they're not in it a whole lot. They have a couple of scenes. It mostly focuses on Tylor and his kind of assimilation into the Monsters, Inc. world and trying to, again, he's this guy who wants to be a scarer but comes into Monsters, Inc. and they're no longer scaring. They're getting laughs and he's not a funny guy, so he has to kind of reevaluate himself. And this very first episode really kind of focuses in on Tylor. As we get into the second show, though, Mike and Sulley do actually get quite a bit of screen time. And in particular, Mike actually has kind of a side story. And I feel like it might do this throughout the rest of the series. There's going to be 10 episodes all up. And I think that's an okay way to do this because at the end of the day, this is not only, a semi kind of sequel to the original movie, but it is a spin-off. And I feel like that this is Disney's way to kind of try and move in a new direction with this franchise. I mean, John Goodman and Billy Crystal, I feel probably aren't going to be doing these characters for a long time. I think they still do a very terrific job here. I think Disney with this is really trying to push this franchise in a new direction so that hopefully we can get more Monsters projects going forward, and eventually there will probably be some that, might not have Mike and Sulley around. And I think this is a kind of a good way to do it. Now, the quality of this is another big question that people are going to be asking about. Firstly, we'll touch on the animation of it all. Of course, this is a television production. Pixar aren't handling. I believe Pete Docter from over at Pixar did create this idea. He did develop the idea, but then they handed it over to Disney Television Animation, who's done the majority of work here. There are a couple of third-party studios that have been brought in to do the animation on this series right here. A couple of studios that Disney have used for Disney Channel stuff in the past. So of course this is a fairly kind of, I guess maybe a mid-budget kind of thing where if you picture any kind of Disney television animation, that's really what you're going to be getting here. However, when you think back to that original Monsters, Inc. film 20 years ago, before, 20 years of advancement in CG animation, you look back at that original movie and that looks fairly primitive. I feel like this series actually kind of matches that style quite well. because this is fairly budgeted. They can't do all the, the refinements and stuff that they can do with the newer stuff. They have to take it back to a kind of a stripped back kind of animation style in the kind of vein that they were working with back in the early 2000s. So this show, even though the animation is not up to standards of, theatrical animation of the 2020s, it does look pretty much like the original Monsters, Inc. did. And I think in that respect, it actually complements it really well, and it makes it feel like a more organic thing. Now, what about story-wise? How does this hold up to the original? Now, again, without Pixar on board, with a faster turnaround time than you would on a theatrical feature, you're of course not going to get up to the standards of a Pixar theatrical film. But within the restrictions that this team are working with, they have actually done very, very well. I love the premise of this show, and I love that we are focusing on brand new characters while Mike and Sulley are still there. I feel like this series doesn't need Mike and Sulley up front. I love the fact that we've got new characters. Tylor Tuskmon is really, really fun, and so are a lot of his team members on the MIFT team, all of whom are voiced by incredibly talented voice artists who bring some really cool, quirky dynamics to this series. Now, the stories are very small scale. They're very simplistic. Again, Pixar's not handling this, so don't expect the kind of grand storytelling that you would get from a normal Pixar movie. This is very much a TV series for kids. And I feel like it does really aim itself towards that young audience just a little bit. And in this setting, you can't get away with a lot of the stuff that you can get away with in the theatrical output. And whether that is like the more existential stories, the epic stories, the more mature comedy, the more mature storylines, you can't really get away with that in this kind of situation here, where it's a television show for children to be watched at home. Yes, this is aimed at kids, but there is a lot of stuff in here that the adults are going to enjoy, especially people like myself who grew up with the original movie. Both movies really in here get a couple of little winks. I love the way that they have combined the worlds of Monsters University and Monsters, Inc. Kind of in the way that you think of the Star Wars sequel trilogy. It pulled in elements from both the originals and the prequels and kind of helps it feel like this more concise kind of universe. They really do that really well here. There's some gags that are kind of repeated from the early movies, but I feel like it's done in a really good way, where it's not so much like, how they go, oh, hey, remember when we did this gag in the original film? We're doing it again. For example, we think of the character George Sanderson. He's the guy that got caught up in like that code red when the kid was running around and everything, and they had to get that team in to decontaminate him, and they ripped all his fur off essentially, while he's back in this with no fur, just kind of walking around the Monsters, Inc. laugh floor, just miserable because he's got none of his fur left. So there's a lot of stuff in here that's kind of thrown around like that. There's a lot of great character cameos from the original shows, a lot of ones that you're not going to expect, a few that you are going to expect as well. But I think it all ties in so well. Overall, how do I feel about the show? Now, I like it, but I don't love it. And I feel like that's kind of how I expected I would feel going into it anyway. I feel like these classic movies that we've known and loved our entire life, it is so hard for something new to recapture that for us. And that doesn't mean that it's worse or not as good. It just means that something that we've watched for 20 years and grown up with, a new thing is never going to match up to that. So you always have to go into something like this with that kind of in mind. Again, there's a lot of stuff there for the older fans, but this really is trying to gear itself towards a new generation of fans. And I think for that audience, this is going to work fantastically. This is a show that kids are going to love. There's so much great stuff in here. There's fun characters, quirky characters, hilarious stories, and really there is some heartwarming stuff in here too. It doesn't have that charm of the Pixar movies. Now, I don't just mean the original Monsters, Inc. I just mean Pixar in general. It doesn't quite have that charm. Again, when you're taking a Pixar property and giving it to someone else that's not Pixar, you're never really going to quite match that kind of, that level of charm or that level of quality or style. But I feel like the team that is handling this has done the best job that they possibly can do. And they have done this really, really great show that feels so organic to the original movies while moving it in a new direction for new audiences. And for that, I have to give this show fairly high compliments. It is a welcome return to the Monsters Inc. world, and I'm so happy they've done this. I really, really, really am. So with that, I will be happily giving Monsters at Work a 3.5 out of 5. Monsters at Work is a wonderful little workplace comedy for younger audiences. While it never quite captures a true Pixar charm, it's an enjoyable series that feels like both an organic follow-up and love letter to the original movie. With fun new characters and plenty of old favourites and tons of great throwbacks to the original movies, Monsters at Work is a series that the whole family will get something from. Monsters at Work will debut on the Disney Plus streaming service on Wednesday the 7th of July 2021 and will continue for a following 9 weeks on after that for a total of 10 episodes. Thanks again to the incredible team over at Disney Plus for providing me with the first 2 episodes of Monsters at Work for the purposes of this review, and thanks everybody out there for watching. I hope you enjoyed the series. I'll see you on the next one. Take it easy. Hey everyone, if you haven't yet, smash that big old subscribe button up on your screen to keep up to date with all my content, and hit that like button down below. Also, don't forget to check me out on social media, and please consider supporting me over on Patreon for as little as $1 a month for exclusive videos, early access content, and to get your name up on the screen. Thanks again for watching.